Please ensure the loan repayment, I told myself. While I was immersed in work, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. Shocked, I immediately reached out to Greg for clarification. He answered with unsettling calmness, saying, "Oh, sorry about that. I've fallen for someone else and decided to start a new chapter with her." To my disbelief, he also mentioned his intention to take the luxury car we had just purchased, financed under my name with a loan. Despite my desperate pleas, Greg was unmoved. He dismissed my concerns, abruptly ended the call, and cut off all contact. Not long after, he vanished with his mistress, leaving me to face the heavy debt alone. As a mother to our 10-year-old son, I never imagined being thrust into such a painful and unjust predicament. My mind was blank, overwhelmed by the betrayal. My name is Hannah. I am 35 years old, and my husband Greg is the same age. Together, we had built a small family with our bright 10-year-old son, Ryan. Ryan, ever curious and sharp, had always impressed me with his intelligence, reading articles on the computer and often seeking my thoughts on complex ideas. Greg, however, was unreliable, struggling to maintain a steady job. Even though I worked full-time to support us, I worried constantly about our future. Recently, Greg had begun... For the past 3 years, Greg had managed to maintain a steady income. Recently, he began talking about creating lasting memories together as a family. This inspired us to make a significant decision, purchasing a $35,000 camper van. However, since Greg couldn't meet the finance company's loan requirements, I ended up taking the loan under my name. When the long-awaited day of the camper van's delivery finally arrived, I was blindsided by an abrupt email from Greg. In it, he declared that he would be taking the newly delivered van since the loan was in my name, leaving me responsible for the payments. Stunned, I immediately called him for clarification. That's when Greg dropped the bombshell, admitting I've fallen in love with another woman. It started as something casual, but now it's serious, and I've decided to start a new life with her. Goodbye. He mentioned the divorce papers we had discussed during an earlier argument, and informed me he would proceed with filing them. Without waiting for my response, he coldly ended the call. It was in that moment I first felt the sting of Greg's betrayal, a devastating realization. My subsequent attempts to contact him went unanswered. Later, when I returned home from work and checked the drawer where the divorce papers should have been, I found gone, leaving me saddled with a hefty $35,000 loan for the camper van. Despite countless attempts to contact Greg through emails and phone calls, he never responded. Noticing my unusual mood, Ryan approached me after dinner, his young face filled with concern. "Mom, are you okay? You haven't been eating much lately," he asked hesitantly. "Oh, I'm fine, Ryan. Maybe just a little tired," I replied, trying to sound convincing. When people lie, they look up to the right. "Lying isn't good," he remarked, his sharp observation catching me off guard. "By the way, Dad hasn't been home for 3 days. Did something happen between you two?" Taken aback by his perceptiveness, I took a deep breath to steady myself. Realizing there was no point in hiding the truth anymore, I decided to tell Ryan everything. After listening, he nodded, his expression calm. "I see. That sounds just like Dad. Aren't you sad?" "Sad? Not really," he replied thoughtfully. "I kind of figured this might happen." Though Ryan seemed unfazed by the news of his parents' impending divorce, I couldn't shake the feeling that deep down he was hurt. I silently apologized to him in my heart and worked hard to push the painful memories aside, though the weight of the situation was taking a toll on my body. But seeing him so distressed broke my heart. My health had been declining steadily, likely from the emotional strain I'd been under. On the day of a scheduled training session at work, I suddenly felt too weak to stand and crouch down, struggling to catch my breath. I need to rest," I stammered, but before I could say more, my vision blurred and I collapsed. When I came to, I found myself in a hospital bed, the steady beeping of medical equipment in the background. The doctor informed me that I needed further tests and had to remain hospitalized. Lying there, staring at the sterile white ceiling and the IV drip in my arm, I couldn't help but feel utterly defeated. Tears began streaming down my face as I whispered to myself, "It's just emotional stress," yet here I am, completely falling apart. Just then, the door swung open and Ryan rushed in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by sheer panic. Seeing him like that, I hastily wiped away my tears. Mom, what happened? Are you okay? You're not gonna die, are you? He blurted out, his voice trembling. I forced a smile and reached out to reassure him. Of course not, sweetheart. I'd never leave my precious boy alone. His relief was palpable as he let out a shaky breath. That's good, really good. I was so scared when my teacher said you were in the hospital. My heart nearly stopped, he exclaimed, his maturity cracking under the weight of his fear. Ryan had always been wise beyond his years, but in that moment he was just a child, my child, desperately clinging to the reassurance that everything would be okay. Only 10, but seeing him worry like that strengthened my resolve to recover, for his sake. However, my health was worse than I had realized. After undergoing a series of tests, the doctor delivered devastating news. I had a serious condition requiring immediate surgery. You should proceed as soon as possible, the doctor urged. Following his advice, I underwent the operation. Recovery took longer than I anticipated, and by the time I was discharged from the hospital, a month had already passed since Greg's departure. Returning home, I checked the mailbox and found a demand letter for the overdue car loan payment. Confused, I thought, wasn't the repayment set to be automatically deducted from my account? Panicked, I grabbed my cash card and checked the account balance. The shock was overwhelming. My once $20,000 savings had dwindled to a mere $33.90. My heart sank. This has to be Greg's doing. He must have taken the money, I thought bitterly. I wanted to confront him, to demand that he return what he had stolen, but I had no way to contact him. Selling the camper van to recover some of the loss wasn't an option either. It was gone, along with Greg. Everything seemed to spiral further out of control. As I sat there, lost in despair, Ryan approached me quietly. Placing his small hand on my forehead, he said with concern, "Mom, you look pale. Are you feeling sick again? You don't seem to have a fever, though." His simple gesture of care reminded me of his innocence. "I'm fine," I said softly, forcing a smile I didn't feel. But inside, I was sinking deeper into the weight of my misfortunes. "I'm fine physically," I reassured Ryan, though my heart felt heavy. "But your father didn't just take the car, he also took all the money we had saved. With my current health, I can't work, and now we're left with nothing. I don't know what to do." Ryan looked at me with the determination in his young eyes. "I see. Then I'll start delivering newspapers, and I'll search online for any jobs I can do," he said firmly. His words gave me strength. My 10-year-old son, despite his age, was stepping up in a way I hadn't expected. I can't let him carry this burden alone, I thought. "I'm sorry for worrying you, Ryan. You're right. I can't afford to be weak. I'll change my mindset and figure out what I can do," I said with a smile. Ryan returned my smile, then surprised me by saying, "Let's make a plan to get the camper van back from Dad." Caught off guard, I asked, "How could we do that? The van may be in my name, but what good does that do when I don't even know where your father is?" Ryan's face lit up with an idea. "Mom, remember? A month ago when we went hiking as a family, I got lost, and you bought me that kid's cell phone with the GPS app?" The memory hit me like a lightning bolt. I had completely forgotten about the GPS app we had installed on Greg's suggestion. Ryan continued excitedly, "Maybe we can use the app to track where Dad went." I stared at him, stunned. It was an idea I never would have considered on my own. Ryan's resourcefulness gave me a glimmer of hope in the midst of all the chaos. "Let's check," I said, feeling a spark of determination reignite. "That's so?" I replied, feigning ignorance as a wry smile crept across my face. Ryan had already outmaneuvered Greg before I even realized it. "Don't worry, Mom," Ryan said confidently, his clever grin matching his tone. "I've already taken precautions." "What do you mean?" I asked, utterly stunned. While I was recovering in the hospital, Ryan had acted on his own and pulled off something I could hardly believe. Not only had he tracked Greg's movements, but he had also uncovered details about Greg's mistress. "I can't believe it. How did such a smart kid come from me?" I thought, marveling at his resourcefulness. Ryan looked at me, his determination unwavering. "Now let's teach Dad, who betrayed us, a lesson." "Okay," I agreed, feeling a renewed sense of strength. "Let's put this plan into motion." Together, we meticulously prepared for the right moment to strike back. With Ryan by my side, I felt unstoppable. "Bring it on, Greg." Anywhere, anytime. 3 days later, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and answered, already suspecting who it might be. "It's me. Please, I need your help," came the panicked voice on the other end. Feigning ignorance, I asked, "Oh, and who might this be?" "Don't play dumb. It's your husband. Obviously, I'm being questioned by the police because of you. If this keeps up, they'll probably ask me to come to the station for questioning. You've got to help me out." A surge of satisfaction coursed through me. "Oh, is that so?" I said calmly, hiding my amusement as Greg's desperation became clear. This was just the beginning. "That so? Just wait a moment," I replied, keeping my composure. Without delay, Ryan and I made our way to Greg's location. To my surprise, he was at a forest park near our house, the type of place where families often go camping. Greg stood there, looking utterly flustered as the police questioned him in front of the camper van. The sight was almost pathetic, and I let out a heavy sigh. Turning to the officers, I said, "Excuse me, but we need to have a private conversation as a couple. Could you give us a moment?" After a brief discussion, the police stepped aside, though their watchful eyes lingered. Greg, visibly uncomfortable under the scrutiny of the gathering onlookers, hurriedly motioned for Ryan and me to get into the camper van. Inside, his mistress sat with her legs crossed, glaring at us with contempt. But honestly, she no longer mattered. Her presence was a minor detail compared to everything else. "Sorry about all this, and thanks for coming," Greg said, his tone a mixture of arrogance and unease. "But what's going on? Why did the police suddenly show up here?" I met his bewildered gaze with calm determination. "That's because I filed a report about the camper van being stolen," I replied. Greg's face twisted in disbelief. "What? Why would you do that? Isn't it obvious? It's my car, and it was stolen," I said firmly. Greg, grasping for excuses, blurted out, "But that's ridiculous. We're married. Actions between spouses can't be considered criminal." I stared at him coldly. "You really don't get it, do you? The world isn't as naive as you think. You filed for divorce, remember? Or did you forget? That means we're no longer husband and wife. Now you're just some stranger driving off with someone else's car without permission." His jaw dropped, and for the first time he seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Ryan, sitting beside me, nodded with quiet satisfaction, knowing we had the upper hand. "To each other and began an affair," Greg admitted hesitantly, his voice shaky. "Things just got out of hand." Ryan's sharp gaze didn't waver as he pressed further. "So, you threw us away because it was more exciting to be with her? Do you even care about what happens to Mom and me?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his son's piercing eyes. Mandy, however, smirked and interjected again. "Oh, come on, kid. Your dad needed someone fresh and exciting. I mean, look at me. Can you blame him?" Ryan's expression darkened. "I told you to be quiet, old lady," he snapped, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. Mandy flinched, silenced once more by the 10-year-old's unwavering determination. "Dad," Ryan continued, turning his focus back to Greg, "if you can't give me a real answer, we're done here. I'll just call the police and let them deal with you." He pulled out his phone, his calm but firm demeanor making it clear he wasn't bluffing. "Wait!" Okay, Greg stammered, raising his hands in surrender. "I'll explain everything." As Greg finally started to open up, it became clear that Mandy had joined his workplace only 3 months ago. The affair began shortly after, driven by attraction and reckless decisions. Greg's explanations were full of excuses, but none of them justified abandoning his family. Watching him squirm under Ryan's interrogation, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for what our family had become, but pride in my son, who showed wisdom and courage far beyond his years. Truth sat frozen, unable to respond. His face was a mix of guilt and frustration as Ryan continued to speak. "You've been caught, Dad. You left us for her and tried to justify it with lies, but I figured you out long ago." Greg's shoulders slumped as he muttered, "So you were tracking me this whole time. I had no idea." "That's right," I added, crossing my arms. "When Ryan got lost during our hike, we bought him a kid's phone with GPS as a precaution. But don't you remember? We installed the same app on your phone, too. I've known where you were all along." Greg's eyes widened in disbelief, but before he could respond, I continued. "By the way, I later learned something interesting. Ryan wasn't really lost that day. He pretended to be, just so he could get the phone. Smart kid, huh?" I glanced at Ryan, who was sitting calmly, his sharp eyes fixed on Greg. I knew something was off about Dad, Ryan said matter-of-factly. So I came up with this plan to monitor him and see what he was up to. Greg let out a defeated sigh, shaking his head. You really are a terrifying child, Ryan, he admitted. I can't believe how clever you are. Ryan's expression didn't soften. And I can't believe you'd betray the people who care about you so easily. I will never grow up to be like you, Dad. Someone who hurts the people that matter most. Faced with the weight of his son's words, Greg fell silent, his usual arrogance replaced by a rare glimpse of remorse. The gravity of his betrayal was finally sinking in, and for the first time, he seemed to realize just how much damage he had done. Blanched at Ryan's words, her smug demeanor vanishing in an instant. Wait, hold on. Isn't that going too far? She stammered, clearly panicked. Greg, equally alarmed, raised his hands defensively. No. Let's not involve the police again. We can work something out, right? I folded my arms, glaring at him. You don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation, Greg. That $20,000 wasn't our money. It was my savings from before we were married. You've squandered it, along with your integrity. As for the camper van, you used it without my consent, which makes it theft. This isn't just a family matter anymore. Greg tried to offer a feeble excuse. But we were married. That makes it joint property, doesn't it? I shook my head, incredulous. You've already filed for divorce, remember? And even when we were married, you didn't contribute to those savings. You quit every job you had, leaving me to handle our finances. That money wasn't joint property. It was my safety net, and you destroyed it. Ryan, standing beside me with his phone in hand, looked at Greg coolly. Mom, should I call the police now? I can do it in one tap, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Mandy, clearly panicked, grabbed Greg's arm. Greg, do something. This is serious, she hissed, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Greg's facade of defiance crumbled. Okay, he blurted. I'll pay it back. Just don't involve the police, please. I raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do you plan to repay $20,000 when you've been unemployed and irresponsible all this time? His silence was deafening. For the first time, Greg seemed to fully grasp the consequences of his actions. Ryan's calm determination and my unyielding resolve had cornered him. The power dynamic had shifted, and Greg was left with no place to hide. Workplace confirmed everything, Ryan interjected with a calm yet sharp tone, his eyes fixed on Mandy. Mandy's parents glared at her, their anger palpable. Mandy, what on earth have you done? Her mother demanded. We raised you better than this, leaving your job to run off with a married man, and now this mess. Her father, visibly furious, added, And you dragged us into it. We trusted you, and this is how you repay us, disgracing the family like this? Caught off guard by their presence, Mandy stumbled back into the camper van, her face pale. Mom, Dad, please. It's not as bad as it looks, she pleaded, her voice shaking. It's exactly as bad as it looks, her mother snapped. Your selfishness has hurt not only this family, but also his wife and child. How could you do this? Mandy turned to Greg, her expression desperate. You said this would all work out. What am I supposed to do now? Greg, already crumbling under the pressure, mumbled, I didn't know they'd get involved. I didn't think it would go this far. Ryan spoke up, his voice steady but cutting. While Mom was in the hospital, I went to Dad's office and told the truth. I showed them pictures of you two at the welcome party, looking like a couple. They were the ones who told me where you lived, and I made sure your parents knew everything. Mandy's jaw dropped, her panic intensifying. You're just a kid. How could you? I'm a kid who cares about my mom, Ryan said firmly, his gaze unwavering, and I won't let either of you keep hurting her. Mandy's parents, still fuming, turned back to her. You're coming home with us right now, her father said sternly. You're going to take responsibility for this mess, starting by apologizing to Hannah and her son. Mandy, cornered, reluctantly nodded. The tables had turned, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of justice taking shape. Ryan's determination had not only unmasked Greg and Mandy's betrayal, but had also brought unexpected allies to our side. Mandy's parents' faces turned from anger to sheer disbelief as the realization dawned on everyone. Greg, who had been glaring at Mandy moments ago, froze as her growing stomach became the center of attention. When is the baby due? I asked pointedly. Mandy hesitated, her voice faltering. In 3 months. The room went silent. Then I broke the tension. Wait a second, that doesn't make sense. You and Greg met only 3 months ago. How could the baby be due already? Greg's eyes widened in confusion as he turned to Mandy. What? What does that mean? He asked, his voice rising in alarm. Mandy rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed. Are you really that dense? It takes 9 months to have a baby. Do the math, genius. The baby isn't yours. Greg's face went pale. You've been lying to me this whole time? I left my family for this? Mandy smirked, her smugness returning. Well, I couldn't exactly tell you the truth, could I? You're so gullible, it was almost too easy to fool you. You're unbelievable, Greg shouted, his voice shaking with rage. You've ruined my life. I ruined your life? Mandy snapped back. You're the one who left your wife and kid for me? Don't act like you're innocent in all this. Their argument quickly escalated into a chaotic exchange of insults and accusations, each blaming the other for their disastrous choices. Greg looked utterly broken, while Mandy seemed more irritated than apologetic. The rest of us stood in silence, watching the scene unfold without interrupting. Mandy's parents shook their heads in disappointment, while Ryan and I exchanged a glance of quiet understanding. Neither of us felt the need to intervene. They had made their bed, and now they were lying in it. As Greg and Mandy continued to tear each other apart with words, it became clear that their relationship had been built on lies and selfishness from the start. For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. Greg's betrayal no longer felt like a weight on my shoulders. It was simply the inevitable outcome of his poor decisions. Fear, her arrogance vanishing in an instant. Wait, me? Why should I have to pay? This has nothing to do with me. Mandy protested, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms and glared at her. Oh, it has everything to do with you. You knew Greg stole that money, didn't you? You used it too, didn't you? That makes you an accomplice. The law doesn't look kindly on that. Mandy's face went pale as she stammered. But I didn't steal anything. It wasn't my idea. It doesn't matter whose idea it was, I replied firmly. You benefited from the theft, and that makes you just as guilty. Be prepared to face the consequences if Greg can't repay what he owes. Greg, sensing his own sinking ship, tried one last desperate plea. Please, Hannah. Let's work something out. I'll pay everything back, I promise. I'll do whatever it takes, just don't let them take me to jail. Ryan, standing beside me, didn't miss a beat. You've made a lot of promises before, Dad, but you never kept them. Why should we believe you now? Exactly, I added, my voice steady. This isn't about revenge, Greg. It's about accountability. You'll repay the money after you've taken responsibility for what you've done. And don't worry, I've already found you a job that'll cover both Ryan's child support and the $20,000 you stole. Greg hung his head, defeated, as the red and blue lights of the police cars reflected off his face. The officers stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Mr. Gregg, you're under arrest for theft, one of them announced. As they led Greg to the police car, Mandy stood frozen, her earlier bravado completely shattered. She turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. What? What should I do now? That's not my problem, I replied, my tone cold but resolute. You made your choices just like Greg did. Now it's time to face the consequences. As the police cars drove off into the night, Ryan and I stood together, watching the scene. Mom, he said quietly, do you think he'll really change? I looked down at him and smiled softly. That's up to him, Ryan. But either way, we're moving forward, together. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. The long, painful chapter of betrayal was closing, and a new one filled with hope and determination, was beginning. Mandy, panicked, turned to her parents for help, but they coldly refused. We can't support a daughter who brings disgrace and causes harm to others, her father said sternly. From this moment on, you're no longer part of this family. Left with no options, Mandy and Greg were taken away together in the police car, their futures uncertain. Thanks to Ryan's clever thinking and unwavering resolve, we were finally able to hold Greg and Mandy accountable for their actions. Though their detention didn't last long, the consequences of their betrayal continued to haunt them. Through a lawyer, I successfully claimed $20,000 in damages, and Greg was ordered to pay $500 a month in child support for Ryan. To ensure he kept his obligations, I even arranged for Greg to work at a subcontracting factory associated with my company. His wages were garnished directly, with the child support and damages automatically transferred to my account each month. As for the camper van, I sold it and used the proceeds to clear the auto loan, lifting a significant burden off my shoulders. With these issues behind me, my health began to improve. The emotional stress that had once weighed me down was gone, and I felt revitalized, pouring my energy back into my work. Ryan, ever dependable, took on household chores and errands with enthusiasm, showing maturity far beyond his years. Looking ahead, I'm determined to keep moving forward. My goal is to create a stable and fulfilling life so that Ryan can follow his passions and dreams without any obstacles. Together, we're building a future filled with hope and resilience.